there's a truck in my field. In my field, there is a truck. On the back is a thing. Yeah, a thing is on the back. What's that thing on the back of the truck that's in my field? It's a lime buggy, buggy lime. What's the thing on the back of the truck in my field? It's a lime buggy, buggy lime. A lime buggy on a truck with a lime buggy, and buggy filled with lime filled buggy thing. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. What's the thing on the back of the truck in my field? It's a lime buggy, buggy lime. What's the thing on the back of the truck in my field? It's a lime buggy, buggy lime. A lime buggy on a truck with a lime buggy, a buggy filled with lime filled buggy thing. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Lime buggy lime. Hey guys, how y'all doing? Welcome to another Goodstream. I told you I was going to do a lot more of these things. So we are doing another Goodstream. So I have lots of things to talk about since I can't go out in my garden and do all that much right now because it's too cold. We had about a 25 or 24 degree overnight low last night, which is not really amenable to most planting. So, you know, I was pleasantly happy with how well the barrels of water in the greenhouse did. The thermal mass in the greenhouse keeps it warm overnight. Last night I did decide to go ahead and put a little propane heater out there, a cheap little propane heater to just take maybe the edge off the cold just in case. But I mean, the night before I went down to 27 or so and no damage. I have coffee plants, mango plants, no damage whatsoever. And, you know, those are very sensitive. I mean, you get down to even close to 32, they start kicking off on you. So the couple dozen barrels of water in there, that thermal mass, that is my passive heating system. And I've shared a lot on that before. I don't need to talk about it again. But I was happy to see that it worked. And I thought, you know, if it's going to get down to 24 or 25, you know what, I might just go ahead and run the propane heater just in case. But I bet you I probably could have just had the barrels in there and it would have been fine. When it gets down in the teens, that's when I really start to worry. I might have to, like, you know, go out there and make a big compost pile or something to keep it warm. I was trying to figure out how to do that this year. Let's make a giant compost pile in the middle of the greenhouse. But hauling all the materials around and finding all the materials and getting enough greens and everything, I said, yeah, I can't figure out a compost pile right now. So, propane heater it is. Anyhow, guys, it's nice to see you all. So, tonight I wanted to talk about better tasting vegetables through science. Science! Through science! So, science. Now, I started with lime buggy for a reason. And that is, here in the South, and in some other places too, here in the South, it's quite common to lime fields in order to make sure that your soil is a little sweeter, that is, that the pH is a little bit higher, and to make sure that plants are capable of taking up the nutrients that they need. If you are lacking enough calcium in the soil, calcium acts as a catalyst that allows other things to work better. So if you don't have your lime in the soil and you throw fertilizer on it, as one of the fellows at the feed store told me once, you're just wasting fertilizer. If the pH is not correct, if you don't have that calcium spoke properly on the barrel, the good old barrel of nutrition, you do not do particularly well. So if you lime your fields, you can, they sometimes call it poor man's fertilizer, because you can see results, and even the nutrients that are in the soil become more readily available. Now, this is, of course, under certain soil conditions. It's not going to be a fix-all for everything, but lime is a pretty good guess if you're having some issues, particularly if you see a lot of acid-loving weeds and plants around the area. Like if you got a lot of pines and wild blueberries and yaupon hollies and things like that, you're reasonably assured that you have acid soil, and possibly very acid soil, which means the calcium is probably not that available to the plants. And if you make calcium available to the plants and the pH goes up a little bit, you can have a much better results from whatever other fertility you put on the soil, or even just what's already in the soil. So when we tested our soil, it was in the mid fives. I think I actually have it here. One second. Let's see what we got here. My report on my pasture. pH, soil pH. This is actually in the garden. The soil pH in the garden was 5.6. That's pretty low. Generally, you want a vegetable garden to be closer to 6.5, not 5.6. And that's actually quite a bit of difference between a 5.5 pH and a 6.5 pH. But it's nothing that some good old lime can't fix. Now, what is lime? Lime is pulverized limestone. That is just the ag lime that we spread. It's not quick lime. It's not a fast-acting lime. It is a pulverized limestone that slowly makes the lime available to the plants, and it lasts for quite a while until you need another application. So it's hard to mess up, you know, putting a lime on, and if you put too much on, it's not really that big a deal. If you put on too much of quick lime or something, you're gonna be in big trouble and destroy. You don't want to destroy it, right? So the thing that I think a lot of people get nerved out on is that they don't want to add chemicals. Like chemicals. Is lime a chemical? Well, yeah, pretty much everything is a chemical. But is it a bad chemical? You know, we've had bad chemicals get into our gardens before. And we know of lawsuits over glyphosate. And we know of long-term persistent herbicides. And we know of people being born with terrible birth defects because of various chemicals. So we hear chemical and we go, is it a chemical? You know. But pulverized limestone is not a big deal. I mean, you could take oyster shell and spread it around your garden, and it will very slowly release calcium into the soil if you wanted to. Pulverized limestone is not anything to worry about. It's very cheap. It's cheaper than your standard fertilizers. Generally, you know, it's maybe 50, 60 bucks a ton if you buy it not in bags, but you buy it in bulk from a feed store or a place where they actually deal with lime. You know, you want to figure out where the farmers are getting stuff from and go there. You don't want to go to places that are selling to backyard gardeners. If you can deal with the farmer supply places, you can get a lot more for a lot less money. And you got the economy of scale going on. So do I worry about throwing that on the ground? No, not at all. Pulverized limestone, great. Makes the grass grow better, makes the garden grow better, makes the pecan trees more productive. Totally fine with that. I'm happy with that. So there are some people that would say that they're organic purists, right? So they would say, you know, I only use compost in the garden. Some people will even say they don't use manure in the garden. I don't believe any animal products should be in my garden. You know, and to me that kind of strikes me as a little too far. But hey, if you're growing food, that's great. But it always reminds me of like trying to get your dog to eat vegan or your cat to eat vegan. They're not really made for that. I mean, there's a really nice cycle of nutrients that works out really well if you have animals and plants working together, such as if you have an area that you garden on for a period of time and then you graze some animals on it and the manure gets mixed in, or you run chickens through it or ducks through it or something like that. There's a really nice synergy between animals and plants that you may be missing out on. But sometimes you can't do that sort of thing in the city. You know, you're going to basically be feeding plant materials to plants, which is fine. You know, you make a big old pile of of organic material and make your compost, and you feed with compost. But even in that compost, you're actually going to have a lot of manure, right? You understand why? Because you've got manure from the various grubs and maggots or whatever that might be chewing on it and eating it. You've got manure from the beetles that get in there. You've got manure from the worms that get in there. And you've got micro manure from all of the itty bitty little microorganisms that are eating, excreting, dying, etc. in there. So all those excretions are getting in there. There's insect frass all through it, right? So you're going to get manure whether you like it or not. As somebody told me once, they said, I like to put a bunch of organic matter in my garden and then let the worms manure it. I said, that's a really good way to think of it. The manure, they're going up and they're eating that material, and they're going down and they're manuring the ground beneath. And in their manure, they have a much higher concentration of beneficial bacteria and fungi than you might even find in the soil itself. They are inoculating as they go and concentrating and making... It's really magical how worms are able to make such valuable micro manure and tunnel and loosen the soil up and work around your plant roots without damaging your plants. It's very cool. You need a micro manure t-shirt. I like that. So there is a lot of sense to saying, okay, I'm going to simply use organic materials to feed my garden, because there are plenty of great organic materials that you can use to feed the garden. And we do know also, if you treat the soil as if it's a dead medium and you till it repeatedly and you just treat it as a line of figures in a calculator, right? Well, we're missing this amount here and we're missing this thing here, and we tested and it looks like we're low on sulfur and we're high on this. And then you just balance it all with chemicals and you don't pay any attention to the life in the soil, you're kind of missing out on something. That's not to say that you can't grow some impressive crops that way. I mean, if you look at modern farming, a lot of it is figuring out, you burn the soil up and basically in the laboratory and extract it with acids and other things to figure out what is in it mineral-wise. And then you say, okay, it lacks this, or it's got more of this, and so I don't need to add that, and I might add some of this. And if you fill in all those little gaps of what's missing, and then you throw it on the ground with your crop at the right time, and you apply as needed through the growing season, you can see great results and get a good crop off of it. So there was a certain sense to that. But if you get to the other end of the scale, where you get into the super organic territory, or the Korean natural farming, or somebody like Elaine Ingham, they'll say your life in the soil is actually maybe even more important than the minerals that are in the soil, because the life makes the minerals available. So let's say, if you got two different people, you got one person that's all the way to the organic end of the spectrum and the soil life end of the spectrum, and then you got somebody that's all the way to the chemical end of the spectrum, and you give them, two plots of ground. The one person is going to say, okay, the soil is missing this, and this, and they will get a formulation of fertilizers to treat those deficiencies and put it on there. The other person might say, well, if I give the soil, it may be low in copper, I may be low in magnesium. What if I give the plants the most abundant living environment possible through compost teas and compost application and no-till, and making sure that the fungi are accepted, or maybe even going out and getting leaf mold and inoculating through the soil and putting all the life in there, and knowing that fungi and bacteria and other things may be more efficient, particularly fungi, at gathering the minerals in the soil and making them available to the plant. So you may not even have to adjust the minerals that much in this world, but if you are fostering a healthy soil biome and focusing on the organic, the living web of the soil, it might bring even those tiny amounts of minerals to the plants through the symbiosis between the plant roots and the fungi, because we know that fungi work with many varieties of plants, and they make nutrients available to the plants. The plants are not particularly good at mining or finding themselves. Some people will even go so far to believe that you can actually transmogrify elements from one element to another, and they'll talk about tests where they had they test all of the elements in an egg before it hatches, and then they test it after. They test the chick and the egg, and they have a different amount of minerals in there. Well, how could that happen? Maybe some minerals are getting turned into other minerals, and they'll get out into this realm that just gives the chemical side, the hard science side, that just gives them fits. It's actually very hard to quantify life because there's so many moving parts. But it's kind of nice to say, okay, I got this. I can see how much sulfur there is. I can see how much cobalt there is. I can see how much iron there is. And I can lay those blocks out and say, in order to make a wall that's a nice wall, to fill in all these gaps, I'm going to have to put 2 more blocks of sulfur, and I'm going to have to put 1 block of magnesium, and I have to put 3 blocks of calcium, and then I will fill in all these gaps, and then I've got a nice setup in the soil. The soil, all those little gaps are missing. So the complicated parts of life, I mean, we don't even know what most of the bacteria are in the soil. They don't even have names. You know, we've got billions and billions and billions and trillions of bacteria in your garden, billions in a teaspoon of soil, and we don't even know what something like 90% of them are. It's so complicated. We know actually very, very little. So how do you figure this out in your own garden? You know, what are you going to do? I tend to take a two-pronged approach to this. I trust that this is a designed system, that nature was put together properly in order to take care of itself and to grow and to bring forth fruit. But I also know that certain things do better in certain areas, and nature is pretty brutal at selecting out the stuff that doesn't fit. So if you have a patch of ground, like I said before, that has a lot of pines and yapons on it and maybe some wild blueberries, and you try to grow something that is a higher need crop that likes a little more, a little sweeter soil, a little higher pH, a little more love and care, it may not be fitted to that area. So there's you know, you might be fighting against the environment, you may be fighting against geology to a certain extent, and even if you have friendly bacteria and fungi in the soil in general, you're going uphill, you know. So I would like to give my plants a good soil biome with lots of life in it. I'm always throwing different materials on top of the ground in my grocery rows for them to rot down. At one point, I threw in some shredded rotten pine. I know that's kind of probably pretty acid. At another point, I throw in some ashes. At some point, I throw in some charcoal material. I have thrown down hay that I knew didn't have any contaminants in it from an unsprayed field. Let that rot down. I have put in rotten wood chips from mixed hardwoods. And then in my herb garden, I just put down a bunch of pecan shells in the pathways. I've put in alfalfa. I like the idea of putting a wide variety of materials that different fungi and bacteria can break down, and there's also different minerals coming from those different things, and allowing it to all be there and just kind of let it sort out and see. But sometimes you may just find that certain plants aren't particularly happy, and they don't really like your garden, or they don't like the geology that's beneath. So if I try to plant something that's kind of higher need in this acid, sandy, pineland or scrubland type soil, it just may not be happy. So even if I tried to add the right fungi, etc., maybe it just isn't going to like it there. But maybe I could push it to like it there If I went a step further and I added pulverized limestone, now we're starting to mess with the geology a little bit. We're starting to get a little bit more towards the commercial farmer mindset. And then maybe I just want to see it grow fast. And I go get some liquid fertilizer or something like Peter's Plant Food and give it to it. Oh dear. Oh dear, that's bad. Now you're getting into bad territory. It's evil. You can't do that. I remember an older gentleman who had a really nice little food forest in his backyard. His name's Ralph. And I said, man, these vegetables and things look really nice around the edge. And he goes, well, I got to tell you, I do use some Miracle Grow. I said, oh, you do? Because like he's got all these different plants all mixed together and everything. It's on very bad soil, sandy Polk County soil, which is not really soil at all. It's just a place for fire ants to live. And he says, yeah, I put Miracle Grow on them. They really like that. He says the soil here is really bad. I'm like, yeah. He says, but the Miracle Grow, it doesn't have to go on not the roots per se. He says you just water the plants with it. It just goes on the leaves, and then the plants turn green. I was maybe that's the miracle, that you can just put it on the leaves and they turn green. Oh, maybe that's the miracle. Foliar feeding, the miracle of foliar feeding. It's Miracle Grow. It's a miracle. So, you look at this. And you say, that's terrible. That man, Ralph, man, he's doing bad things. He should have made some lasagna gardens or something, or gotten a big pile of wood chips, or never tilled the ground or something to make the connections. But I'll tell you, if you leave that area alone out there, say you never till it. I used to go hiking out there all the time, and it was stickers, just weird stickery plants that wanted to tear you up, big patches of white sand in between plants, weird scrubby things. I remember there's a plant out there called bully. Bully actually makes an edible fruit. There were cactuses, like prickly pears with really, really extremely long thorns. Like, they're not happy about being there either, and they're going to make you not happy to have encountered them. It doesn't really grow beautiful stuff like you would think, but it has its own ecosystem. There's lots you can eat out there if you know what you're looking for. It grows some nice citrus, but if you look at what they feed the citrus, maybe that's not a good thing to think about. But it's not, I don't think Ralph was wrong. I know, just come out right out and say it. I don't think Ralph was wrong. I think that there are, there's 16 essential plant nutrients in Miracle Grow, or whatever the knockoff versions of it are, or Peter's Plant Food, or Dynagrow. There's a lot of different ones. But generally, they know of 16 minerals that plants need to thrive, and there's probably some other ones we just don't know what they do yet. And if you give them to a plant doesn't seem to really care if it got it from the native soil or if you added it. So we did some experiments. You probably saw my experiments about 3 years ago, where we took a series of little garden plots and we tried different amendments. And on the different plots, we tested different things. And it was in extremely bad soil at our previous rental. I called it the sand pit of death. Terrible soil. I mean, you can't even hardly call it soil. I used to call it dirt all the time. People get upset. It's not dirt. You're not showing respect. That's the skin of our mother. That's the skin of our mother. That's soil. No, it was dirt. It was dirt. Terrible dirt. But we made all these little beds and we tested some stuff. Tried a bed where we put in worm castings. Tried a bed where we put in alfalfa pellets. Tried a bed where we made a lasagna garden, where we layered a bunch of different materials together on top of the ground and planted into it. And we tried a couple of experiments. We tried using Steve Solomon's mix. Steve Solomon's mix is a mineralizing mixture. And what he did was he figured out, you know, the various nutrients that plants need and tried to go with as many organic as possible, but it's not all organic. You get some things like potassium sulfate, a little bit of tiny bit of copper sulfate, a little bit of borax for the boron, and some lime, and I think it was cottonseed meal, and then kelp meal as kind of a catch-all in case you missed any micronutrients. It's got all the nutrients of the ocean in it. There's a whole mix. It's on my website, thesurvivalgardener.com. You can look up Steve Solomon's mix, complete organic fertilizer mix. He used to call it complete organic fertilizer, but he's kind of moved towards, you know what, let's just use a little potassium sulfate or whatever we need. And we tested these different plots, and we tested one plot with just 10-10-10. And we had an interesting experience with it. We did a taste test afterwards, and we noticed that the plants that were in the lasagna garden bed grew well and were large and full and happy. They were pretty, but they didn't have a super rich flavor. It was good, but it wasn't super rich. One of the beds, we made biochar. We soaked it in Dynagrow, which is kind of a niche version. These hydroponic guys that grow cannabis and that kind of stuff, they often use this stuff. And it was recommended to me by Steve, who said it was kind of a cutting-edge mineral solution. So, okay, I'll try some of that. So we soaked it in a heavy solution of that, and then tilled that into one of the beds. And then we did another bed that was Steve Solomon's mix. The flavor of the vegetables in that biochar Dynagrow mix were excellent. And the flavor in the Steve's mix were excellent. The micronutrients that were available to the plants, even in this non-ideal, horrible, ratty soil that we probably could have prepared better, and it's probably not a very good test for the no-till, maybe nature will find what's lacking kind of a thing, because we had forked up a bed and then just covered it with sheet mulch for one season. Perhaps over a longer period of time it would have been better. And again, there's so many moving pieces in nature. Sometimes it's hard to prove, you know, when it's working or when it's not, or how it worked. But the flavor of the mineralized vegetables was startlingly good. Just exceptional. Delicious. To the point where we were craving radishes. We wanted to eat more radishes. And radishes are not normally something that we crave. Normally it's like, it's nice, some radish. We'll throw that, we'll make some pickles or something. It's pretty good to put a little bit of radish in the salad. It's a little bitter, a little spicy sometimes, and kind of like you get some better radishes, and some are just kind of watery and bland and a little bit bitter underneath, a little bit spicy underneath. But these radishes tasted like the full expression of radishes all the way back, recapitulated to the Garden of Eden radishes. You know, they were delicious. Surprisingly delicious. And that is what I had heard before too. If you have well mineralized vegetables, they have a better flavor. So people will do things like add rock dust to the soil, and some people swear by it, and some people say that doesn't work, that or it doesn't make much difference. Other people say adding sea salt. I think there's probably something to that. Adding seaweed. Well, there's a lot of minerals in seaweed. That's probably a good idea. But the important part is that the plant actually gets the minerals. And sometimes if you're trying to kind of rough guess it, like let's say we'll just add a bunch of manure, you might end up with a ton of phosphorus, but not enough of something else. Maybe you get a whole bunch of copper from one thing. Or maybe you're making all of your compost off of your ground, and where you are is very low in a few particular minerals. So when you make compost from the plants on that ground, maybe they're low in the minerals too, and your compost is low in those minerals. What if you could just get some of those minerals from somewhere else and throw it in your compost pile? Pass it through. What if you threw seaweed in your compost pile? Let it compost through. The flavor of well-mineralized vegetables was surprisingly good. And it reminded me of when I first had farm eggs compared to regular store eggs with their pale yolks. And to taste eggs from chickens that were eating bugs and weeds and grass and running around all day. My Aunt Karen had a flock of chickens that would just wander all over the place. And we'd go and gather the eggs, and the eggs were dirty and weird. Oh, weird. Different colors and stuff. But they tasted incredible. There's a real richness to the yolks. Yesterday when we were talking about growing calories, we talked a little bit about how potatoes have a much richer flavor when you grow them in the garden compared to getting them in a bag. And kind of tapping into that, I had red-yellow clay in Tennessee, and I sheet mulched on top of it to turn it into some semblance of a clay loam. And I was really broke. So broke that I was going dumpster diving for a little extra food here and there. And I would hit only, only the best Aldis. Only the best Food Lion. But what I found out was I had a friend who would go dumpster diving, and he was actually better educated than me. He was a professor, actually. But he hated the idea of all this food going to waste. And he would go dig in the dumpsters at like 1 in the morning. It was like doing a heist to go out there with his flashlight and his gloves. Wait for the fuzz to roll down the alley. Once they disappear around the corner, pull up in the dark, jump at the dumpster, go in the bottom. Sometimes they throw out a whole bag of apples just because there's one that's got a bruise on it. So look for that. Look for those bags of apples. Yeah. So you throw out an entire bag of Gala apples because one of them has a bruise. That's the way it works. Lots of waste. Tons and tons of waste. So it isn't really as bad as it seems, You go to the dumpster and you come out with a bag and throw away the bad one. You wash the rest of them. And hey, you just made the world a little greener by not throwing that into the waste stream, right? Plus you save some money on buying apples. And it's really hard to go buy apples when you realize that there's probably like 5 bags of them out there. There's probably like 50 good apples in the dumpster right now, in bags, sitting on top of boxes and stuff, not sitting down in the muck on the bottom of the dumpster. We don't do that. We do have standards. Only the best dumpsters, my friends. But anyhow, I pulled a whole bunch of potatoes out of the bottom of a dumpster. One rotten potato, potatoes that get a few eyes on it, etc. They turn green. Boom, hit the bottom of the dumpster. Well, I'm not going to eat green potatoes, but I did make a bed in the backyard. It's like, I got all these potatoes from Aldi's, from the Aldi's dumpster. You go back there, and I went back in the backyard, and I dug trenches through the clay. And I dropped those potatoes down there. Red potatoes, yellow potatoes, white potatoes, salad potatoes, and Yukon Golds, and some russets. And mulched over the top of it, filled it in, held them up a little bit over the next few months. And then we harvested a whole bunch of different colored potatoes. And those potatoes tasted way better than the original potatoes. And I'm not talking about dumpster potatoes, but I'm talking about the original varieties of potatoes. If I went and bought them in a bag, so I know that it's the same genetics, the ones that came out of the clay in my backyard with the compost and the sheet mulching, etc., tasted way better. And I think part of that is the mineralization. I think that commercial potatoes are not being produced necessarily to get the broadest range of micronutrients and, fungal soil web life, etc., but to make sure that there is a good-looking product that grows reasonably well and gets to the right size and is financially viable. So these potatoes look and taste decent and are a good size but they don't taste as good as the ones that come from your garden, even if it's the exact same variety. So I know it's not a genetic difference. There's a difference in my brand new clay that had been under grass for who knows how long, and I stripped the sod away and sheet mulched and planted potatoes later. I think there were more minerals in the soil. I think this is why they tasted better. There seems to be something to this. And we've heard all of these warnings, right? There's not as many minerals. There's not as many minerals in our food today as there used to be. You know, apples today have such and such less minerals in them, and such is not nearly as nutritious as it was in 1954, etc. So, if you're able to do that in your backyard, to get the minerals in, to get the highest level of flavor, to take a potato from something that is pedestrian to something that is divine, to taste the most potatoiest potato that you have ever tasted, the rich flavor of fried potatoes from the garden, it's just unbelievable. Like, you didn't know potatoes were so good. They're just better. Like, those eggs are better. Like, the first time I had chicken that had been raised on pasture in a backyard, a friend of mine had me over for chicken. The first time I had backyard pasture raised chicken where they had eaten bugs and grass and been in the sunshine for their entire lives, and then they had been butchered and plucked and frozen, and they weren't coming from big houses packed full of antibiotics. They weren't soaked in manure-y water and injected with whatever to fill out the weight of them. They were just chickens that had lived a chickeny life and then been put in the freezer. And that chicken was as good as steak. The chicken was so rich and delicious, I could not stop eating it. I had never tasted chicken before. So I think we can get that same thing with a lot of vegetables. We don't even know how good vegetables can taste sometimes because we've never experienced them. We've experienced vegetables that were bred to look good. So this is part of it. Part of it is genetics. They're bred to look amazing, like the red delicious apple, which is red but is not delicious. It's a function of genetics, but it's also a function of mineralization. If you taste something that's a commercial variety that has been well mineralized, I'm going to bet you that it's going to taste better. I bet you even a red delicious would taste pretty good if you could grow it in volcanic soil. I don't think it would be the best, though. I think you're going to get better results from something like a Gala or a Pink Lady or one of the old apple varieties that you rarely see anymore. There were varieties of apples that were extremely delicious that no longer are sold because they didn't look good. They didn't look good. They were overlooked. It didn't look shiny, and maybe it didn't ship so well, but the flavor was incredible. There's a variety of peach that was bred for Florida called Tropic Beauty. It is a low chill peach with melting flesh and a free stone on the inside. And it is exceptionally delicious. But there are commercial varieties of peaches that are picked early and shipped around that don't taste anything like that peach tasted. Part of that is because they're picked early. Part of that is because they are not a backyard peach for you to enjoy right off the tree, but they're a peach that is designed to be shipped. Flavor is secondary to the way it looks and its shipping characteristics. So we have to remember that genetics are playing a portion in this. But on the other hand, when we had plants that had the same genetics and we grew them in beds side by side and we put 10-10-10 on some of them and we put the 16 minerals in the biochar in the other set of them, the ones with the 16 minerals in the biochar tasted amazing. The ones with the 10-10-10 were barely edible because the soil was really bad around them. They just were getting those macronutrients, and they grew, but they didn't taste very good. The micronutrients really seem to make a big difference. So how do we manage this in our gardens? I think that it's a combination of having respect for the soil life and not tearing it up and killing it off. So we don't use any pesticides. We don't want to kill any of it off. To allow the fungi to connect. We've always got stinkhorns growing through our garden, much to the chagrin of some of my family. They can't stand the stinkhorns, and the garden stinks of stinkhorns. But they love the mulch. And there's stinkhorns all over the garden that pop up. I'll be digging out there and I'll pull up stinkhorn eggs all the time. Apparently they're good to eat. I have not tried. But I think that you need to have some respect for the soil life, right? I think that there is a time, maybe if like when the pandemic hit and you're freaking out, I told people, I was like, listen, if you just got to till an area up and throw some 10-10-10 on the ground to grow food, don't worry about it. You don't have to do everything perfect right now. You want to work towards perfect. But as G.K. Chesterton said, anything worth doing is worth doing badly. It's better to actually try and do it, you know, than it is to just try to be a purist and then never actually do anything. You know, the people that have the artistic temperament where they feel like they have this great, great novel in their head, but they never can actually get down and write it? It's because they don't have enough of the day-by-day plodding to get it done. They're not practical enough to actually get it done. You have to have a little bit of practicality too. And the first thing, you know, like I was saying yesterday, talking about growing calories, is to ensure that you're growing food. Your primary goal is to grow food. But secondarily to that, then you start working on the fun stuff, which is, how can I make this better? How can I replace commercial fertilizer? How could I make these vegetables taste better? How can I find varieties that grow better in my garden that are happier? So if you figure out the genetics through land racing if you want to, or testing different varieties of commercial seed, you know, you might try 10 different varieties of tomatoes in your garden and then grow the ones that succeed repeatedly, or grow the ones that you like the flavor of better. But then you take those ones that do well already and let's give them a little more minerals and see what happens. Let's see if they taste even better. I don't have a problem with using commercial fertilizers. I have been burned badly by trying to do things the organic way and throwing manure on the gardens. Composted cow manure killed a whole bunch of my plants. So that has never happened with bagged fertilizer or Miracle-Gro. Never killed any of my plants. It didn't have long-term persistent herbicides in it. So it's, you know, I think there's a spectrum here. If I want to add lime to the soil, great. I'll add lime to the soil. I think there are some of those commercial fertilizers that are going to burn your soil out and burn your soil life out. But I don't think that, say, if you were short on boron and you took a teaspoon of borax and you mixed it up with maybe a few quarts of lime, so it's spread out much further, because borax is hard to spread and you need very little boron, but you do need a little bit. And if you were to take that and then spread it down a couple of your garden beds, so you get that teaspoon of borax all the way along there, I don't care if you put 20 mule team in your garden. And if you look at it, magnesium sulfate. Oh, magnesium sulfate, that sounds like a poison. It's like dihydrogen monoxide, you know? It's dangerous stuff. Magnesium sulfate is Epsom salts, and you'll go on Pinterest and people are talking about how Epsom salt's this for the garden and Epsom salt's this for the garden, and it doesn't seem like that's very bad, but that's a chemical. That's a salt. It's a salty, bad chemical. And you know, it's not a problem. You just sprinkle around your garden. I put a teaspoon of just go along with a teaspoon and put a teaspoon in each one of the pots in my nursery sometimes of Epsom salts. And then you just, as you water it in, it gives it the magnesium and a little bit of the sulfur that the plant needs, and it makes photosynthesizing more efficient, and the plants get happier quickly. They love it. You put a little bit of Epsom salt solution into a watering can and go and water your plants and see what happens. They love it, because they're, you know, those are elements. They need the elements. So I think if you have your soil life already good and you're not dumping a bunch of commercial fertilizer on it and tilling it to death and grinding it into powder and then just treating it like it's a dead medium, but if you give them the minerals on top of already having the soil life, like let's say you throw some lime into your compost pile and then it just kind of rots through and gets turned into the compost, and now you've added calcium to your compost and you spread it. I remember Noah Sanders, who wrote the book Redeeming the Dirt. He talked about how he had read a study that when you add lime to your compost pile, it actually makes it more efficient. You need a lot less lime to make your plants happy because it gets bound up somehow in the minerals and bacteria and becomes more available to the plants than if you just scattered lime across the tilled earth. So I think having the life, the network of life there first, but then, hey, let's give that life a little more minerals to mess with. Let's mineralize the soil a little better. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I don't see the evil necessarily in using some chemical fertilizers if a plant needs it. Just like there's the occasional time where you get sick and you might go to the doctor and the doctor gives you this, that, and the other thing and it makes you better. I just don't think you should be doing that all the time. I don't think your plants should be like addicted to pharmaceuticals, you know what I mean? But I do think that if you had the extra minerals there and they get mixed into the soil life and they get cycled through your garden, that could be a good thing. So Steve Solomon, when he did his experiments for The Intelligent Gardener, I think I have that book here somewhere. No, I don't have The Intelligent Gardener here. I have Steve Solomon's Gardening When It Counts, which is another book I highly recommend. In The Intelligent Gardener, he talks about how he took a bad piece of ground, a bad piece of soil, and he grew organically. And as he was growing organically, he was following the idea of, like, if I give it enough manure and enough compost and I take care of it, I can grow almost all of my own food. And he basically was living mostly off the vegetables coming off of his land. But his teeth got loose, and he had some joint issues and some other things, and he wasn't that old. But he was living on bad, degraded soil that he was trying to fix by doubling down. He said he just kept doubling down on manure, kept throwing more manure on it, more compost, more manure, to grow the plants. And they grew, and he ate them. And he's a very smart guy. But he was trying to, make do with what he had and be sustainable, etc. Anyhow, he went on a vacation to Fiji with his wife for a little while. They got a chance to go to Fiji. So they thought, let's go to Fiji to a hotel. This is crazy cool. So they went there for a period of time. And he said after about a week of staying in the hotel and just eating the hotel food, he said he was eating a lot of fresh salads and fruits and things that he didn't normally get to eat, like tropical stuff, I suppose. He said that he started to feel better. And he said he could feel his teeth tightened up in his gums. He's like, what in the world? So he said he was looking at the food and he asked the waiter, where do you get this stuff? Oh, they grow it down here in the valley. They grow it there in this. Is it organic? No. It's commercial farms, whatever. He said they're spraying. They're doing all this other stuff that you would think, oh, this is terrible. However, the soil was volcanic. So there were a lot more minerals in what he was eating. And his health started to improve, and it gave him some thought. He started chewing on it. What am I missing? What am I missing? So he's gone back and forth between the organic and the adding of additional minerals to the garden to mineralize the plants and allow them to get what they need, because then they turn it into a form that you can use. They make it much more bioavailable to you. There's the enzymes and the sugars and the fats and all these other things that these minerals can move through and around and in. And you take it in and you do better eating the minerals in in a form of a plant or animal form than you would if you just took the minerals in a pill. And try to get all your minerals in a pill. If you can get it through your food and let your food be your medicine, then you are going to be healthier from it. But also the produce just simply tastes better. So somewhere on the spectrum there between organic and chemical, there's a sweet spot. And I tend to just ride the edge of not spraying poison and avoiding poisonous inputs. When I realized that manure could contain all these long-term persistent herbicides, I stopped using it. But I'm not really as concerned. I mean, it's an irony, but if you get a mineral solution for plants that's been developed in a laboratory, science, deep science. If you get that and you put it in your garden, and your plants thrive, and they get all the minerals that they need, and they're super happy, I don't have a problem with that. It didn't kill my 90-foot or 100-foot row of blackberry bushes like the long-term persistent herbicides did that were in manure when I was trying to do everything properly. But I also don't think that you should have to rely on laboratory products from far away to have a good, happy, and healthy garden. So there's a balance in there somewhere. I feel like at this juncture, when we have the ability to do things like buy kelp meal or to buy potassium sulfate and put a little bit of it in the garden if we're low on potassium, I think you could just do that. But there may be a point in the future when you can't do that. If things got really bad and weird, and you end up back in that Weston A. Price world where Weston Price was studying which areas of the country had more people rejected from military service, and he overlaid it on a map of the soil and figured out that mineral deficiencies were leading to a lot of the chronic diseases that were keeping young men out of the military. If you have to re-regionalize and your area is low on this mineral, low on that mineral, so all the kids have bad teeth or joint problems or other things, then you start to see that again. But right now we have such an international trade in vegetables. We don't even know what soil most of them were grown on. We may not even know what country they were grown in, unless we're really carefully checking all the labels and everything. We're probably getting minerals from all over the place that we don't know about just by eating a wide diet. I mean, just eating Brazil nuts will give you a huge amount of selenium, for example, and a little bit of radium. But, you didn't really have that luxury necessarily in the past, and maybe we won't have that luxury in the future. Who knows? There's always some dire prediction here or there about oil running out or all the borders closing and things collapsing into a new, Carrington event where a giant EMP from the sun roasts the whole grid and everybody's back to, all that scary stuff that I don't worry about. God is in control. But I think that if you have access to the minerals now and you want to mineralize your soil and do some experiments and see if your vegetables taste better, I would love to hear how that works for you. Because it was very interesting when we tried it. And it kind of converted me a little bit more towards, you know what? If I need an element, I might just add it. From, I'll let nature deal with everything and I'll just try to find the right genetics of plants that will fit my garden. So I'm going to be doing some more experiments with mineralization of the soil and some of Steve Solomon's mixes. I've talked to him about the soil test results that I have off of my land. And it'll be interesting to see how our vegetables do and how they look, particularly when I look at what I have, that I am quite low on sulfur. I'm very low on boron. And I was low on potassium. And my pH was 5.6. Soil organic matter was only 2.14%, and that's in the garden where I've been adding organic matter. Out in the fields, it was way worse. It was like 1.3, 1.4. So, something to think about. Something to experiment with. If I balance out those bars like one of those commercial farmers, but I also have the soil life in place. Maybe it'll keep cycling through. I mean, man, I really miss the volcanic soil that we used to have down in the Caribbean. If I could get a truckload of that soil and scatter it all across my garden beds, I would be really happy. I've also thought, wouldn't it be interesting every time I go and visit other people's places in different states or visit other gardens or, go to Appalachia or something, to dig up 5 or 10 5-gallon buckets full of the clay, the sand, the loam, or whatever happens to be there, and then take them back to my garden and dump them down the beds, add all those micronutrients, maybe permanently improve the soil, maybe end up with some pest I didn't have before. I don't know, but something to think about. Something to think about. And I did really notice that the vegetables were tastier, even when we were using Dynagrow. That's, like, to me, that was kind of repulsive. Like, why do they taste better from here than they do from the lasagna garden where I was carefully making a nice composty bed for them to grow in? Why did they taste better there than they did with the worm castings that we put in the soil? I guess it's the minerals. But it bothers me to have to buy minerals in a plastic jug. So I'm conflicted. But Steve and I also talked, and he said one of the best things you can do if you can afford it is to go get a few sacks of kelp meal and just add kelp meal to your beds. Sprinkle kelp meal all over your beds every year and get all those ocean minerals back in. And I said, okay, kelp, it's kind of expensive, but what is your health worth? Interesting thoughts. Interesting thoughts. And I thought I would share them with you this evening as we continue the cold weather string of good streams. I'll take some questions now if anybody has any questions or any ideas. We've got a few minutes left here. Yeah, bring home a few buckets. As long as the land wasn't exposed to mine runoff or downstream from DuPont. I agree. Christopher says David talks about Florida and the Caribbean a lot. What did you think of that Tennessee clay? I seen land up there is getting cheaper this year. I liked Tennessee clay. You could grow a lot in it. You got to make sure that you're not getting an area that is stripped of topsoil, though. A lot of the developments, they just flatten it out and plant. You want farmland if you can get it. Some beautiful farmland up there. It takes a little while to get used to working with the clay. If you till it at the wrong time of year, it turns into rock. It cracks in the summer. They tend to have wet winters and wet early spring followed by drought in the summer and fall. So you just kind of got to get used to the cycle of growing up there. The allergy season is unbelievable. The pollen there just about killed me. But it was, I grew some beautiful plants there. I really liked it, particularly after we had mulched it for a while. Carl says every plant you harvest takes some nutrients with it too, so you have to add it back somehow. Yeah, I agree. Carl also says volcanic soils like in Costa Rica / Hawaii have all the micronutrients and minerals, which makes their plants go bonkers compared to other places with similar climates but poor soil. Yes. Yes, South Florida has a similar climate to some of the Caribbean, but the soil is a sandy beach sand, so it's not like some of the soil in Cuba, for example. I'm gonna send you guys a link if anybody wants to join us in the community. School.com/the-survival-gardener. Got some new stuff I'm posting over there. We're going to be talking more about soil mineralization this weekend. I do a live Zoom stream over there. Steve says, any plans for creating a pond to harvest nitrogen-fixing mosquito fern? It makes great fertilizer. They use it in rice paddies in Southeast Asia, maybe even chicken food. Yeah, like Azolla. I'm I grew Azolla in a kiddie pool before, and in a couple of reused hot tubs, and man, it's cool stuff. It's cool stuff. Nitrogen fixing little fern. I would throw it around my peach trees as a mulch and just let it rot down into the ground, and it would grow back. Sandra says Himalayan salt made 100% improvement in my health. There's 86 minerals, something like that. Yeah, that is super cool. It's interesting that just changing your salt made a difference. I know that the standard sodium chloride table salt is apparently not a very good balance for your health compared to regular, like sea salt, So, thank you, Corey. I appreciate it. And thank you, Christine. I'm glad you're over there. Stoked on Earth says, I put a bag of volcanic rock around my coffee trees. It's a good idea and a slow release. Oh, I love that idea. I wonder if you could get pulverized volcanic rock in a bag to throw in the gardens. It's quite possible. Christopher says, I've had a lot of tiny holes in all my root crops, sweet potato, turnips, etc. 2 years in a row. I planted mustard on advice to cure nematodes. Not sure what else to do. Yeah, it's probably not nematodes that are making the tiny holes. There's probably a root maggot or something that is doing that. I'm not sure. I've not had that problem before. But generally, the nematodes make weird knots on the plant roots that you can see. Yeah, biochar, definitely. Pastor Don says, are there natural sources of minerals you can source yourself, like crushed oyster shells or something? Yeah, absolutely. Oyster shells are good. If you can go out and you can harvest seaweed from the beach, that's good. If you add manure, you can get more phosphorus. If you add ashes, you can get more potassium and calcium. These are all possibilities. If you can get bone meal, like I always say, compost everything. I have so many bones in my garden because I was getting all of this scraps from a restaurant for a while. Bones and bones and bones and bones. That's slow release minerals. It hits the dirt, says, would you rather get microbacteria and fungi and spores from a forest and let them build your soil? This is also possible. However, a forest biome is not going to be necessarily the correct biome for annual vegetables. Annual vegetables, according to a lot of research, tend to prefer a bacterially dominated soil. So when you till and you plant vegetables, they actually like that. They don't mind it being tilled up and being planted. They seem to thrive on it. Some vegetables and perennials will do a little better if you have a more fungally dominated soil, etc. But it's kind of an interesting thought, Watercolor Painter says, how are your grocery row garden trees doing? It seems that your method is stunting their growth. Yeah, it's deliberately stunting their growth. I mean, that's the point. You're keeping them small enough to make it so the vegetables can fit around them. They're doing well. As a matter of fact, they're outgrowing. I mean, they're not stunted enough. I have a peach tree out there that's like 20 feet tall, and I was hoping to get peaches off of it, and I didn't get peaches off of it, so I'm going to let it flower and make peaches this year, and then I'm going to prune it more than in half after it produces peaches, if it produces peaches this year. I have mulberries out there that are growing just insanely fast, and they've outgrown their space, and they're going to get butchered after. I did not do very well with the summer solstice pruning this year like I should have. I should have really been hard on them, and I didn't because I was just sort of getting excited about how big the trees were growing. It was kind of fun to watch them. The trees grow a lot faster in the grocery row gardens than they do out in the yard. So I think they just love all the love that the vegetables get. But the method is supposed to stunt their growth on purpose, to have smaller bush-sized trees that can be harvested by hand and that don't shade the vegetables around there. That's the idea. Hey, Love Cat, I missed you. Where have you been? It's nice to see you. Prune your plants like a psychopath. I hope your new gardens and everything are going well. Christina says, if I add minerals into my compost with my chickens, is that too intense, or do I need to add them to the garden directly? I'm not sure if you mean minerals into my compost with my chickens. Are you composting in the chicken run? I'm not sure. It depends on if it's going to be too much for the chickens. Justin Brock. Hey, little David and Rosie, good to see you. My sweet niece and nephew. Love you guys. Steve says, my compost is full of iguana bones. It's kind of creepy when they appear in my garden. Yeah, that's funny. Lovecat, that's awesome. 460 pounds of meat, 406 pounds of vegetables. You're going to hit 1,000 pounds this year at least. Good work. Just had to get rid of a troll there. Nigella Blossom says, the data points from your soil test sound a lot like how our soil was before I started working on it. I've been working on it for over 10 years. For 10 years. Some things resolved quickly, others took several years. Yeah, that's great. B says, question. When do you plant cassava? I just use the fig pop method. I have emerging leaves and a few roots. I have to keep them alive until spring arrives. I plant them after a last danger of frost. I'm going to go back up a little bit. How do you break up clay soil with lots of rocks? It's even hard to do it with a broad fork, but after a really good rain, when it's moist, you can break it a little with a broad fork. I would add gypsum to the soil. Definitely add gypsum. I would lime it, and I would sheet mulch it if I could. Yep, we are still in Christmas until Candlemas. That's correct. This is still Advent season. Hey, YouTube police, nice to see you. I was reading more about whole grains and how they have a lot of minerals. Do you mill your own flour? No, I don't do very well with flour. We have milled our own flour. I don't feel good when I eat bread. My wife does make bread for the kids regularly, but we haven't been milling our own flour. It definitely tastes better when you mill your own flour, though. She tried to get a sourdough thing going too, and she's killed so many sourdough starters. They're like a pet that just dies. You know, it doesn't feed itself, and you have to take care of it. It's terrible. Live Simply Shore says, I get overwhelmed with the fertilizing and figuring out the ratios and all that. Good resources to read it through and figure it out. Not really. I'll tell you what. I mean, you could read The Intelligent Gardener. It gives you some good ideas. But when it gets down to calculating the math, like somebody asked me today, a good guy, a guy I really like, but he asked me, how many cubic feet of water in barrels do you think you need per space in your greenhouse in order to keep it through a frost? I was like, I have no idea. I just throw a whole bunch of barrels out there and put water in them, and it seems to work. But to actually calculate the ratio of how much thermal mass I need to keep my greenhouse for each degree of temperature fall, I'm not an engineer. I am an artist, man. I'm actually a bossa nova singer that turned into a YouTuber, and so, you know, I get overwhelmed with all the fertilizing and figure out the ratios and all that. So what I do is just put things on the ground and see what happens if they don't look too green. If they don't look too green, if they don't look too green, I give them more. Oh, that's terrible. That's why I had to become a YouTuber, because I was so bad at bossa nova. Hey, Bowtie Life in the Garden. Nice to see you. I'll go a little further down here. I'm going to go back down. B says, thanks, D to the D. Tell your wife I bought her cookbook. It's supposed to be here Saturday. I'm excited to read the new recipes. Well, thank you very much. She'll appreciate that. Oh, yeah, I saw the video of the cold plasma. The cold plasma on plants. That's funny. Christopher says I use a digging bar on my limestone. I could see that. Break it up. Yeah, Bell of 29. You know what I mean? Water is a great thermal heat sink. It works. But Pam says, do you use metal or rubber containers to hold the water in your greenhouse? They're just 55-gallon plastic drums. Yeah, the more mass, the better. It really is just that simple. More mass can hold and then release more heat. It's like a big battery. Christopher says, I think you make good EDM. Hey, Julie from Michigan. Live simply short. Good. Cool. Thank you. I'm a total chaos gardener, so that works. LOL. So just throw some kelp meal out there as a catch-all if you want to. Or get as fancy as you want. Get a soil test. Figure out what Steve Solomon and Erica Reinheimer recommend in The Intelligent Gardener, and then try to fill all those gaps in. Or get a soil test at your local feed store or university and ask them what you need to fill in the gaps on, and just treat the soil like a dead medium. You'll still have decent results. But I would tend to get more soil life, and I'm not that scientific, so we just experiment as we can, and I'm not gonna try and get exact ratios of everything. I'll be like, all right, we seem to be a little bit short on boron, so like I said, just sprinkle a teaspoon carefully mixed in with a bunch of lime down the whole thing. Is that enough? I don't know. If the broccoli stems don't have holes in the middle of them, it probably was. Water weighs 8.33 pounds per gallon. Hey, why not? Hey, South Florida Sunshine. Nice to see you. Pastor Don says, yes, I have water barrels by my Satsuma trees for this Gulf Coast freeze this week. Yep, me too. Me too. I've got multiples out in the yard. So, guys, I'm going to call this stream. Tell me how it turns out if you do any experiments this year. We're going to be experimenting more with mineralizing and getting tastier vegetables, because I cannot get the taste, the memory of the taste of those perfect radishes. Just the craziest thing, that the radishes were the most radishiest radishes that I've ever had. The most delicious, crisp, sweet, excellent radish with just the right bite. And it was all that mineralization. So thinking about that, now that I've got my gardens growing well, we got our 2 tons of food out of the garden this year. I feel like I'd like to experiment more with mineralization and see how it goes, see if we can get more flavor. So, God bless you all. Have a great evening. And until next time, may your thumbs always be green.